Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. This week's Race C is a Group 3 race that has tuning, and while that doesn't quite fix the meta disparity, it does even the odds just a little bit. Let's get into it. This week's anti-meta car is the beautiful Lexus Rseat F. Overall, a really solid performer in pretty much every single category, including tire wear, which is important for this week's race. With the tuning involved, it becomes something else entirely, and it's really a joy to drive. Despite there being a few different cars in the top 10 and a bunch of different cars involved overall, it's pretty clear the Genesis X is once again the meta car. I was able to put it in 56th place, which was the third fastest RCF, just behind the man who tuned this car himself. I wasn't quite able to match his pace, which makes sense because, of course, he did tune the thing. Again, we do see a lot of different cars in the top 100, but it's very clear just looking at the leaderboard that the Genesis X is the meta car. Here's the tune I used, developed by MewMew79. I actually don't know if it's Moo or Mew Mew, but either way, I'm going to link up his YouTube at the top right, so make sure you check it out. Even more shameful than mispronouncing his name, I also actually changed the acceleration sensitivity from 20 to 14, but that's just because of my skill issue with the throttle. As soon as you get to the first braking zone, the track is going to curve inward just a little bit, so make sure you angle yourself that you don't go off the track. Right after this access road on the left, as soon as the grass starts, you want to hit the brakes. Brake in a straight line all the way past the 50-meter board, and right after that you're going to be in second gear, turn in, and further downshift to first gear to get that nose tucked in. If you cut too much of this corner, there's a big dip and it's going to upset your car, so don't get too close to that bollard. Get back up to second gear and back on the throttle. If you experience any oversteer, you've got to correct it as soon as you can. Position yourself to the right as far as you can until you get to the end of the curb on the left and then start turning in. After turning in, gently lift off the throttle, apply a little bit of brakes, and downshift to first when you get to the beginning of the curb on the left. Use as much throttle as you need just to hug the curb until you see that red outhouse in the distance and that orange part of the wall. Then you can start getting fully on the throttle, making sure that you track out all the way so your left tires are just barely on the curb. When setting up for the next braking zone, you want to aim yourself so that you're on the pavement and the curb before the end of the dark green AstroTurf here on the right. Start braking about 2 of the red portions of the curb before the AstroTurf ends on the right. Continue trail braking using as much brake as you can without getting any understeer, and then approximately at the end of the access road on the left, you want to dip down to first gear and put just the right tires on the curb right here. We want to use as much of that as possible coming off of the curb right at the end right there, and then aim at the roller coaster in the distance. Accelerate hard until right before the barrier here on the right changes, and then we're going to lift off and turn in once again. Aim so you cut as much of this curb as you can, only your left tires on the colored portion of the curb, then get back on the throttle. As long as you touch the light part of the AstroTurf there, you're going to be fine, and of course get back on the track before you hit the dirt. As soon as you get back on the track, we're going to take a straight line directly to the next braking zone, which is going to be right after this access road on the right. I want you to brake hard, go to third gear, and then turn in as soon as you get to the beginning of the curbing on the left. Once you hit the apex, I want you to downshift to second gear and then get back on the throttle, immediately shifting back up to third gear when you need to. We want to carry as much speed as we can into the next braking zone, which is going to be at the end of the curb here on the left. Don't worry at all about getting all the way to the left. We're just going to brake hard, get to second gear, and start turning in before the beginning of the sand on the left. Immediately trail braking in. If you apex just about right here, you should be able to get on the throttle gently, of course, in second gear and track out all the way to this outside curbing, making sure that you don't touch the sand. If you find yourself sliding on throttle, you're probably costing yourself more than a tenth in that corner, so be very careful on throttle. This next line I take a lot different than most people I see take this corner. I learned it from a good friend of mine, and for me, it's more consistent than any other way to take this corner. Starting from all the way on this cement runoff, we're going to aim for the apex immediately and brake hard in a straight line at the beginning of the inside curb. Your goal should be to double apex this. We want to get to second gear before we hit that first apex, dip it to first gear, then back up to second, gently on the throttle, and then apex the second time on your way out. I actually missed both apexes by a little bit, so if you keep it tighter, you can go even faster than this. From here, we're going to take a straight line to the outside curb going into the Schumacher S. You want to actually stay full throttle on this, but I messed up, and if you mess up, it's not too bad just to lift off the throttle barely, so you can make sure you get on this inside curb, because if you go on the outside curb, or if you run over it and hit the sand, you're going to get a penalty, and it's going to kill all your momentum. You want to avoid touching that sand at all costs. Remember, a slight lift is infinitely better than completely ruining your lap. Once again, taking a straight line to the next braking zone. As soon as you see all that cement, we're going to go onto it, and then right before this green portion, we're going to hit the brakes hard. Look for the white line going across the track. In third gear, we're going to turn in right after that, dip down to second so we can get all the way up in this curb, and then back on the throttle in third gear, making sure that you go all the way to the outside of the track, but not onto that curb. At the end of the curve to the right, we're going to change directions. After changing directions, we're going to lift off the throttle and then begin braking at the beginning of this curb here on the right. Second gear can help the car decelerate while still freeing up a lot of front end grip, and then you can get back on the throttle in second gear or third. I actually prefer second gear for this one. Again, be careful of oversteer and definitely avoid the sand at all costs. When approaching this kink, it's not bad to use a little bit of the curb, but don't track yourself all the way to the left. You just want to stay close to the right. For the trickiest part of a very difficult track, we're going to brake directly at the 100 meter board. I want you to brake 100% pressure. You're going to get all the way down to first gear and past the 50 meter board before starting to turn in, and it's not until your car is decelerated enough and you can start feeling the turn in that you're going to come off the brakes. I want you to look at this angle. From here you can see that only my right tires are touching the curb. If I go straight from here, only my left tires will touch the curb and we will obliterate that cone in the distance. This is the perfect angle. We want to turn this into a straight line, so you're going to get on the throttle, try not to oversteer, but as much throttle as you can possibly muster in between the corners, and stay on that throttle as much as you can after. You'll probably be able to get on full throttle in between the two curbs, and of course, you want to lift just a little bit for the second curb. However, the more throttle you can use, the faster your car is going, the less chance you're going to have it spinning out. So really using your monster truck instincts, go straight over those curbs. Utilizing all of the curb here on the left, we're going to look for this cone here on the inside, and right before we get to that, we're going to start braking. We want to start turning in shortly after that in second gear, and you can dip down to first gear to get the nose to tuck in if you feel like you're going to miss the apex. You don't need to use first gear though. Make sure you shift back up to second gear before you get out of the corner, and if you touch the inside curb, it might make you slide. However, if you touch the outside curb and you're still steering, it can also make you slide. And of course, avoid the sand on the outside. Don't forget your upshifts, and that's the end of your lap. Like I mentioned in the breakdown, the track does curve in just a little bit as soon as you hit the brake, so make sure you're either aimed so you don't go off the track, or you turn slightly but then straighten the car out before you start turning in. Definitely try to avoid getting too close to the inside. I actually did get too close, but I was able to counter steer and maintain my momentum. There are some elevation changes in this entire sector, so be really careful when you're on the throttle. It's pretty easy to slide out when you don't want to. Sacrificing the exit to this left-hander is the key to getting a really good exit for this right-hander. The track limits here are wild. You can use that light green part of the AstroTurf, but if you go out before that, you're going to get a penalty. Another really weird corner here is this left-hander. You want to sacrifice the exit. It's not that important to get all the way to the left. It is really important to carry a lot of speed and make sure that you get a good exit for the right-hander though, because it is a pretty long area after that corner. But since it's not a really long area after the left-hander, beforehand, it doesn't really matter. I fully admit that I actually can't do this corner the traditional way, so I'm really lucky that my friend taught me how to do it the double apex way. You can actually do it a combination where it's a traditional entry and still a double apex, but I really like being able to brake late and in a straight line going into that corner. The Schumacher S's are all about bravery, but remember, it's much better to lift off just a little bit rather than completely ruin your lap. There's a happy medium between setting yourself way up to the left and losing momentum. So if you're in the middle of the track before you turn in, it's going to be okay as long as you get on the throttle early enough and you make that really, really smooth, the transition between those two corners. Tracking out all the way to the left will just waste your time. Get yourself aligned early for this because this is probably the most important corner to nail. It's really interesting how you have to take this. You pretty much have to go straight over the curbs, minimize the amount of steering, and keep as much speed as you can. The slower you go, the higher chance you have of sliding out, which might seem counterintuitive. As a final note, patience on the throttle is very important in general, but of course for that final corner, it is easy to slide out there. So I had actually not even decided on an anti-meta car until deep into last night, so I wasn't able to get a really good race during my stream yesterday. I have one student who I teach a mixture of martial arts and flips to, a sport called tricking. She's fantastic, but directly after that lesson I came home, jumped in the car, and had this fantastic race. I actually had a lot of fun during this race. Starting all the way in the back, the gentleman directly in front of me is actually one of the very fastest drivers in the region, and he was in the meta car. My initial plan was hoping that he'd just be able to make a hole through all of the traffic and I could just stick to his bumper and follow all the way through. As they say, however, sometimes the best laid plans don't always quite work. I want to thank my official livery guy, Avalerian, for making this livery. It is the livery that I use for the Pure Racing League, which features some of the world's best drivers, and it happens every other Sunday, and of course, I stream it. I've mentioned this in the past, but T1 here is very similar to Monza T1, and if you're into sim racing at all, then you know that it can be a nightmare. So I wasn't about to push the braking too much, but I did think I could trust sticking next to Fox. Fox is N. Arriagada. I don't think I said his name right. I'm so sorry, Fox. I love you, buddy. But he was able to get cleanly through. In fact, everyone was, which I thought was really cool. He went on the inside of Cowboy. I was going to plan on going the outside, but then Cowboy made a little bit of a miscalculation. I was able to get on the inside, and of course, usually when people miss that first corner, they slow down a lot. Things got pretty crazy, but I was able to get past him and then right up next to RWB Buckwild. Doing my best to give Buckwild space, he also gave me space, and it was really fun through that corner. It was really scary when Eder Silva slowed down there. I thought I might actually end up running into him, but he was able to take off quickly, and RWB Buckwild and I were actually still next to each other, and then things got really crazy. Going for the pass on Eder, it was really scary seeing Buckwild fly straight past me. I don't know if he just wasn't paying attention or if he just had target fixation on my bumper and wanted a late break despite the fact that he was multiple cars behind, but unfortunately, he took out our good buddy Deacon Do. Fortunately for me, that actually cleared up multiple positions and I was able to get right on ahead. As I mentioned in the breakdown, any kind of touching that sand is usually going to give you a penalty, and unfortunately, it did give me a penalty here. The gentleman to my left is known as Bigo in the lobbies. I don't actually know anything about him, but I can tell you that he has always raced me clean. I don't think I've ever had a single incident with him, so shout out to Bigo. Whenever I have someone on the inside going to the chicane, my plan is to brake slightly late. That way, if they give it to me, I barely have a compromised entry, and if they don't, then I can just continue slowing down and slot in right behind them. As for the strategy, you are required to take a pit stop, but you're not required to do anything, and most cars, if not all of them, are not going to need tires. Taking tires does only add 2 seconds, however, so if you find yourself losing a lot of time towards the end, it might be worth it waiting till lap 3, 4, or maybe even 5 to then actually take tires in the middle of your pit stop. If you've been following the series for a while, then you know that the strategy for these races is to just go in the pits whenever you don't have any kind of traffic, meaning if a lot of people are directly in front of you and they don't go in the pits, you should. If you have a lot of people going into the pits on any given lap, you should avoid it if possible. You may have noticed that the orange Merc crossed that pit exit line a little bit early, and that is why he has a 3-second penalty. That penalty is unforgiving. Make sure you do not cross that pit exit or the pit entry on the entry, of course. So we do have a half-second penalty, and we also have Bigo directly behind us. And despite the fact that Bigo is very clean, if he ends up getting in front of me, I'll still have to use up a little bit of time trying to get in front of him. So my goal right here is to go as fast as I possibly can to ensure that I stay in front of him when I do serve my penalty. Chosen Goose in front of us was just far enough away that we're probably going to get a little bit of dirty air, but we're also probably going to get some slipstream when it mattered. As long as we didn't have to battle him too much before he served that penalty, as soon as he did have to serve that penalty, he was going to be a non-issue officially. Like I mentioned before, you can definitely take the Schumacher S's, which is this high-speed S coming up, without lifting if you get the timing right. However, if you have dirty air, it's probably safest to lift even if you don't think you need to, just to make sure that you don't accidentally slide off into the dirt. I touched it just a little bit there, and this time I didn't get a penalty, but that was a really close one. You can definitely get a penalty for touching it any more than that. Up next, I'm going to do something that I always tell people not to do, and I really shouldn't have, but I was feeling pretty brave. When people ghost, it doesn't always actually ghost them. Even if they look like a ghost, sometimes they're still solid, even before it re-solidifies them. So it's always best just to move off the line. You never know when they're going to re-solidify, and you also don't know if it's just going to glitch out and make them solid. So you should probably not drive through them like I did, unless it's your friend and it's worth it, and then you can make a joke about being inside your friend. Like I alluded to earlier, the best time to go in the pits is when you can come out and not have to worry about any traffic. Everyone has to go in the pits, and if people are battling before or after the pits, then they're going to be wasting time. Since I don't have anyone within 5 seconds in front of me, that means that I am free just to lap as fast as I possibly can without having to worry about wasting any time. Jumping forward 1 lap, we can already see how effective this strategy is. Max was in 3rd place before going into the pits, and of course you have to be very careful when people are coming out of the pits. You've got to make sure you give them space. Luckily he gave me space, and we are now in front of the person who was previously in 3rd position. Jumping ahead one more lap, we can see that our good buddy Fox is coming out of the pits now, and unfortunately he has a penalty. Now, I didn't want to show this initially because Fox just made a big mistake. He's a really good friend of mine. He's a wonderful dude, and this little slide right here barely affected me, but unfortunately, it kind of ruined his race. I feel bad for you, Fox. I'm sorry I had to show it. I just wanted to show how effective this strategy is. He was way ahead of us when we went in the pits, and just because he had to deal with traffic, we ended up setting faster pace than before he went in the pits, and so we came out and were able to be right next to him, despite the fact that he was way ahead before the pit interchange. Again, I can't stress enough how good of a guy he is and how fantastic of a driver he is. That was just an unfortunate mistake. It happens to all of us. I just don't show it very often when I make mistakes on this channel. But anyways, back to the race. The very next person in 8th place is a Matt T. I don't actually know Matt, but he's only 2 seconds ahead, and he is in the meta car. Let's jump ahead to see when we actually get to battle. About the beginning of the first sector of the next lap, we are just about ready to get into a slipstream, which should make it easier to catch up to him. This is also a very good opportunity to point out where you can get penalties, and I actually went and got myself 2 penalties. I put my tires over the white line for the left and the right-hander, and I ended up getting a full second right here. When you do get a penalty, it's really important to try to maintain your composure and of course continue on whatever plan you had. You never know who else is going to get a penalty, and you never know what's really going to happen. I do want you to remember how big this penalty was, and of course the last penalty I had for the end of the race, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, I don't necessarily want people to think I'm going to run into them, and I don't really think that Matt thought I was going to run into him. However, it is a kind of funny benefit to taking that weird line where I go straight at that first apex. It does look like I'm trying to plow into people, but as you can see from the line he took, I don't think it really affected him. He did end up going in the sand right there, but he didn't get a penalty. So, like I said, it's kind of a crapshoot. You can get a penalty there most of the time, but you can touch it and get lucky. He got pretty lucky right there. As you can see from there, I got real close to his bumper, and then he kind of missed his apex. That right there is just pressure, which is a little bit different than making people think you're going to run into them. I'm not sure if he actually thought I was going to run into him during that hairpin, but when I got really close to him right there, he definitely started making some mistakes. That is a very legitimate racing technique. Matt, if you're watching, I'm not trying to talk down to you whatsoever. I am also a victim of the racing pressure, especially when someone who is much faster than me is on my tail. So again, this is just talking about a very real strategy, and again, not anything against Matt. Matt was clearly pretty quick, he knew what he was doing, and the pressure can get to any of us. It is absolutely something I think you should practice. If you get used to driving extremely close to people, not only is it going to benefit you in the way that you can stay close enough for slipstream against cars that have more power than you, but of course, if you can force people to make mistakes without actually directly affecting them, then that's going to be very effective for any kind of racing that you want to do. Now, because of that penalty, it gave us another opportunity to show off what the Lexus can do against the meta car. This time I was much more careful about making sure I don't get a penalty, and on the exit I almost slid directly off. Don't tell anyone though. Like I've mentioned a lot in this series, dirty air can affect you just as much as the slipstream can benefit you. So when you get close enough to people, about 1 second behind them, you have to start worrying about dirty air, so you might need to change the way that you attack corners. Your braking is going to be affected slightly, but your turn in is going to be affected a lot. And not only can it affect how long it takes you to turn in and how grippy the front is, but it can also end up tearing up your tires a little bit more. Actually, a lot more than if you have free air. Since the Schumacher S is all about being on the very edge and of course getting really close to that sand, you've got to be very careful about making sure that you lift off the throttle turning in. Once again, we find ourselves just about where we were last lap, and assuming he was going to make the same mistake, which he did, I made sure that I hit it right and I exited just in time, so I got his slipstream and a better run out of the corner, which led to us going for this move right here. A lot of people will track out in this position, so be very careful of people who do that and be ready to try to pull on the inside. Luckily, he didn't do that. He pretty much just let us have it, and despite that, I almost completely fumbled it. I almost spun out entirely there. I decided to stay on the inside and continue defending going into this corner, and I thought that I was actually going to be in trouble. I thought he was going to get a much better run out of that, use my slipstream, and then we were going to have to battle into T1, but it looks like he either just let me go or he didn't get quite a good enough exit out of there, so for now, we're actually completely safe. So now, because of our pit strategy, that meant we were able to take this lap completely free, and we didn't even see anyone till the end of lap 9. So you can see that I'm about 22 seconds behind the leader. And all three of those first three people, actually I believe everyone in front of us was taking their pit now. That meant that I was going to be able to get in front of, at the very least, the third person on. I wasn't quite sure where Catalan was. However, it became apparent as I came around the final bend that I was going to be able to take a few positions at least. When I crossed the finish line, it looked like I was going to be in second place, and when we went into that first corner, as long as Catalan didn't hit us, we were going to be completely safe. The pit is about 18 seconds if you don't take tires. If you do take tires, I believe it's about 20, but I don't think anyone who's pitting on the last lap is going to take tires. I'm not sure if he was letting me go so he can try to slot in behind me and make an attack later, but as soon as I got in front of him, it was pretty much all over. If you see F Ureta, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, he's about 3.3 seconds ahead. I had two separate penalties, one a half second, one a full second. That equates to more than 1.5 seconds. A half second penalty where it is equates to more like 1 to 1.5 seconds. A full 1 second penalty definitely costs you more like 2 or 2.5 seconds, maybe even longer than that, because not only do you have to jam on your brakes for that entire time, you then have to account for how much momentum you lost, and the penalty zone in this is in the middle of a very, very important straight. So as you can see by the fact that I've already cut a half second out of him when it comes to just the very first sector, I definitely think I would have won this race if I didn't get those penalties, which is heartbreaking because I started all the way in 16th. It would have been a true last to first, but I'm going to spoil the race. I did not win this one. You can see he's too far ahead and the lap's almost over, but yeah, I still think it was a great drive. If I didn't get those penalties though, we would have had a victory. Jumping to the end, you can see that I almost cut, actually I did cut more than a full second out of him in that one lap. So yeah, that definitely would have been an actual victory, but I consider that a personal victory, going 16th to 2nd in the anti-meta car, battling multiple people in the actual meta car. As always, thank you very much for watching my video. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and many of you know that I do stream full-time on Twitch. However, I have been thinking about potentially streaming on YouTube as well. What do you guys think?